In this tutorial, we're going to cover rooms in GameMaker Studio 2. I have opened up a pre-made game, or a game we're working on. By default, when you first start your game, it's going to have a game 0 put in there already. This is just a blank room. And the way you can find that is over here on the right, just below your objects. You can click on this arrow, and it will expand out all your rooms. Now, we have more than one room, obviously, but yours will have, if you just started your game, it'll have room 0. Now, just by right-clicking on this room, we can get to a lot of options. So down here, I've right-clicked, and you can see all of the options we have for the room. So we can create a new room. We can create a child room, which we'll talk about later. We can open the properties of the room. We can add an existing room. This is going to pull up a dialog box for us to find a room that we already have. We can open up one from our library. We can add a group. And what this does by adding a group is it allows you to set up a group of rooms, and you can make these rooms children of this group. And this allows you to get a little bit of organization in your game. If you have a lot of different rooms, you can put specific rooms under a specific group. So for instance, if you had multiple menus, you may have a menu group. Or if you had multiple credit screens that you wanted to have show up, you could do that. If you had maybe player versus player rooms, and you also had single player rooms. So there's a lot of different reasons to use this group. To get rid of that, you just right click and hit delete. And it's going to ask you if you want to delete it, and click on OK. Right clicking again, we can see we can rename the group here. Excuse me, we can rename the room. We can delete the room. We can duplicate the room, so it'll take that room and just make a second copy of it. We can expand all. Just be careful with this. This is not expanding your groups or your child rooms. It's actually expanding everything in this list. So when you click that, you're going to see everything you have in the game. We can also right click and collapse all, and it will close everything. That last one there will actually open the room in Windows Explorer. So when you click on that, you'll see a list. Excuse me, you'll see the actual room file in the Windows Explorer. This is actually a good option if you're working with someone else to be able to get to that room quickly, to copy it, maybe put it on a flash drive for somebody else to use. Next, we want to look at the whole screen, and we're going to just look at what all is available in this screen for us. So the first thing we have is our toolbar, and this will change a little bit based on what we've selected down here, and we'll look at that once we get into the editor. Right over here we have our layer editor, and we will discuss that and how that allows us to add layers to our room. We have our layer properties. We have our room properties. We have our main editor, which is where our room actually will display and we can move things around. We have our status bar here, and it gives us a lot of different options down here, some of which may not show up when you first start your game. And we have our room controls right here, allowing us to add zoom, and we'll look at that in just a little bit. The first thing we're going to look at is the layers. Now, this has changed from the old GameMaker, and we're going to look at some of those changes here. We can still set depths for things, but the way we do it is going to be a little bit different. So the way this works, the things on top are going to be placed on top of the screen. The things on the bottom will be placed below the things on the top. Kind of makes sense. But if we have something on the top that you cannot see through, so let's say it's a solid square, something below it, even just below it, will not show through that square. Now, just to demonstrate what I'm talking about here, this button here will create a new background layer. So I'm going to click on this, and it's going to create the background layer on the top of this list. You can see there's our background layer. It's created it, and now everything is gone. It's not really gone. It's underneath the background. So we can take this background, we can drop this background down here, and now we can see everything again. The background layer is still there, but everything else that you see here is on top of that background layer. The other thing we can do with this is we can turn it off just by clicking this little eyeball. That way we cannot see the background layer, however, it's still there. Now, before we go any further, let's take a look at the menu just below that. That's actually the room properties. So I'm going to turn backgrounds 1 on again, or turn the visibility on again. And let's look at what we have as options down here. So we can create a sprite for the background, or we can actually apply a sprite to the background. So if we've already got a background made, or we want to use one of our sprites that we've made, we just click. We can see now the background has taken that sprite. We can set the color. So I'm going to set the sprite to none again. Click on the color. And this is how you can select your color for your background. We've got to get rid of that. You can horizontally tile or vertically tile any kind of pictures that you put in here, sprites that you put in here. You can see by clicking on that, it tiles them horizontally all the way across. If we tile them vertically, it'll go all the way down. If we turn the horizontal tile off, we'll get them down just the side because it's no longer going horizontally. We can stretch a sprite across the entire screen. The X offset and Y offset will allow us to position the sprite. We can set up a moving layer so we can change the speed, horizontal and vertical speed. And here, if we have an animated sprite, we can have it animated at a certain speed. And the last one down here is depth. We're going to take a second to talk about depth. First thing you'll see is this little lock here. Our depth is right now locked so that we can't change it. I can't click in here to type in there. You can simply click on the lock. It will unlock this number and allow us to type in here a certain depth. So let's look at how this is going to work for just a second. Right now, by default, our depth is -100. We've already unlocked it, so we can actually type in here. And the way the depth works is kind of opposite from what you would think. If we go negative, that's actually going to pull it towards the player. So something that's, say, -500 is going to show on top of something that's a depth of +500. Something that's a depth of 300 is actually going to show behind something that's 200. So let's look at the application here. Right now, the depth is -100. Our background's on top. We're going to click play. And we can see that our sprite is above everything. I'm actually going to move this sprite down a little bit more so we can cover up some of this text here. There we go. So now we can see that our background here is covering our text. And now we're going to manually move our depth from 100 to, -100 to positive 200 and click play. We're going to get this layer depth error. We're going to click no for this situation. And we can see now that because we've increased our depth to 200, our background has actually gone behind the text here. So the higher the number, the lower the depth's going to be. Now, if you are a hardcore reader and have gone through the GameMaker documentation, it discusses a limit to this depth, and it states that the limit is 16,000. So at 16,000, it says that the background will work, which it will, but it also says that that's the limit. Anything placed above that will not show up, which is actually not true. We can put even a whole nother 0 in there and make it 160,000, and our layers will still show up. All right, so we're going to jump back up here to the top, and I'm going to explain a few things in here. I'm going to go ahead and delete this background layer, right-clicking, delete layer. And we're going to talk about these options down here. But first, you see I have a compatibility instance and compatibility background. When I created that background layer that I just had up here and deleted, all it said was background. The reason why I have these compatibility layers is because this game was actually originally written in GameMaker Studio 1 point something another. When you pull that in, it creates this compatibility layer. When you create a GameMaker Studio 2 game from scratch, yours will not say compatibility. It will just say background. So if we want to create a background layer, like I did before, you just come down here and click on this icon, backgrounds 1. You can create multiple background layers just by continuing to click on that. Just to the right of that, you can create a new instance layer. We have a tile layer, and on the tile layer, you can put, the tile layer is for when you are drawing sprites from a tile set. We have a path layer, and that's for drawing paths, and we'll discuss paths in a different tutorial. We have an asset layer, and then we have the background layer, which we've already talked about. Just to the right of that, we can create a folder to organize things. So I'm going to get rid of these. And so, for instance, in this folder, I could put my compatibility layers and organize those to make room for new layers above that. Notice it didn't change anything about how they were viewed over here as far as the depth or anything. And one thing you want to keep in mind, before when we jumped down to this menu, we were in a background menu. So for instance, this is what we saw. This properties is going to change based on which of these types of backgrounds you have chosen. So for instance, we're going to go to our instance background, and you can see now we can see instances of everything that's in our room. This properties window changed based on what I had selected here. So if I had a tile layer, we would get properties that are specifically for tiles. So where is our tile set? How is our X and Y offset for tiles? And if you have questions about tiles, I've done a tutorial and I'll link it here so that you can watch that. Paths are the same way. We can set up paths, and we'll go over that in another tutorial. So down here under the properties menu, this is the properties for the room itself. We can have GameMaker inherent settings for the room. We can make the room persistent, And what persistent means is that normally when we jump from room to room, and say we go from room 1 to 2, and then we come back to room 1, room 1 is normally reset. So any kind of settings that we did, if we had gameplay in room 1 and maybe we changed things around, when we come back to room 1, it's reset like we've never been there before. If we click on persistent and make it a persistent room, then everything that we've changed in room 1 will stay changed. And when we come back to it, it will not be reset. The next checkbox there, clear display buffer. This is, it sets the back buffer with a color. If you're using a background that takes up the entire screen, you can turn that off. However, there's some other issues with that. If you're not using automatic aspect ratio, it can get some things thrown off. So it's better just to keep that checked. The width and the height is the width and the height of your room. So if you want your room wider or taller for any reason, you can set that. Under the creation code, this is the code that's actually run when your room is created, and you can put code in there that set variables or whatever you want to do in your room. The instance creation order, you can set the order in which all of your instances are created if you have a reason to have one create before the other. Below this is the viewports and cameras. What a viewport is if you have a game, for instance, in this game, a single player game, we can see that I've got this white box around where my player is going to be, and I'll try to get over there so you can see that. So you can see our player is right here, which is a tank. This white box around it, that's a viewport. So what happens during gameplay is the player only sees part of the screen. So you can see that this piece that they're seeing here is actually that actually corresponds with this white box. And as the player moves, this white box will move. So you can see that they actually look like they're going down range on this game. So viewports, they don't have to take up the whole screen. You can make it to where you can just see a little portion of the screen if you have a world game or something like that. And you can set all of those options here. You can also have multiple viewports set up. So for instance, we can set up how big our viewport is. We can set up where it is, what it follows, and I'll probably do a whole tutorial on just that itself. And then below that, we have room physics. And in room physics, obviously, we can set up gravity and how it affects objects into the room, how it affects objects in the room. And we're going to look right here. You can see where our mouse is over our room, so we can get our X and Y coordinates in our room here if we want to place something in a specific location. Right up here on our toolbar, I've already used some of these tools. You can see I've got the zoom in tool. I've got the reset zoom tool, so it'll automatically pop back to a reset state. I've got the center fit tool, so I can see everything in the room. I've got play animation tools, so I can hit this and I can play all of my animations and see how it's going to look in my room. And then I've got select from any layer. If I click that, I can select things from no matter what layer I have selected over here. The last thing we're going to look at is the first thing on the list, and it's got a drop down. We can turn the grid on and off, and this little drop down allows us to set the grid color. lets us set the alpha of the grid, so basically how bright that grid is or how defined the grid is. We can set how big our squares are on our grid. So for instance, if we don't like this 3232, we can change it to something smaller or bigger. And our snap is when we place something on the grid. Is it going to snap to two intersecting lines, or can we just place it anywhere we want to in the screen?